I'm walking into the lion's den. Everybody thinks it's a forgery.
I'd like to tell you something about our friendship with Hershel Shanks. Ailey and I met Hershel Shanks in 1984 in Toronto when we were busy planning the building and the establishment of the Bible Lands Museum. And we hit it off immediately. We all disagreed. Ailey used to say things, and then I would say, Ailey, don't say that. And Hershel would say, oh, go on, Ailey, say it. And Ailey would say, no, Hershel knows I'm saying it off the record. And Hershel said, nothing is off the record. Hershel is a man of great controversy and very provocative. And some people like him and some people don't like him, but it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that Hershel, with his Biblical Archaeology Review, has created the opening to the world of archaeology that only existed in dusty old closets and for a few scholars who had no connection to the world. And suddenly he made archaeology a very popular thing. Archaeology has become a spoken word in almost any household today, and it's something that has brought it alive. Whether you believe, whether you agree with him, you don't agree with him, it's irrelevant. It's just important that you learn, because this controversy has caused people to think and to learn and to inquire and to find out more. And this is what has been so important about the contribution of Hershel Shanks. On this note, I would like to introduce you to our very special guest and friend, Hershel.
I start with an unplanned story. Batya told you how we met, and she left out a lot. It was I came up to Toronto, where they were then living, to interview them. And believe it or not, in those days, I was rushing onto the plane. There was no security in those days. And I changed pants, I put on decent pants, and I forgot to change pockets. And I found myself on the plane without a penny and with absolutely no identification. And with this, I arrived in Toronto. Are they going to let me in? They said, look, we'll let you in, but I don't know how you're going to get out. So I'm here in the airport with no money, not a dime in my pocket, not a stick of identification. And at those times, I don't know, it may still be, you took limousines, you didn't take taxis. And I walked up to the limousine driver, and I said, look, I have no money, but I think I can get it from the place I'm going. And I said, it's 50 Home Drive, wasn't that it? Hill Hall. He heard that address, he says, okay, come on. So we went. So my introduction to Batya was I knocked on the door, and I had never seen the woman before, and I said, I'm Hershel Shanks, and I have no money to pay the taxi. and so she said, oh, I'd be delighted to give you the $25 or whatever it was. And she welcomed me warmly into her home. And she was very glad I came up to interview Ellie, and she wanted to make one thing very clear, however. They absolutely had to see what I was going to publish before it went into the magazine. And I said, well, in that case, I'm going to take the first plane out tomorrow. And then we established journalistic standards, and we went on. I want to welcome all the many scholars who have honored me by their presence tonight. Thank them for coming. I won't start mentioning names, but I am very honored, and I see here Shlomo Messiah, my friend, and I'm glad to see him here from London. And I don't know if anyone is here from the Israel Antiquities Authority. Oh, Amir Ganor! Amir Ganor is head of the fraud section of the Israel Antiquities. And he's sitting in the last row. The wonderful thing about Amir is that we can disagree and still be friends. Amir and I, in one sense, have the same aim, the same goal. We want to know the truth. Now, we may disagree about some things, but we know what we're trying to find, and we're doing our best to find it. We're here tonight to discuss an ancient inscription, or I shouldn't say an ancient inscription, I should say an inscription on an ossuary that is ancient. An ossuary is a bone box, and this inscription reads, James, or Yaakov, Bar Yosef, Achui, de Yeshua. James, the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Before we begin, I'd like to take a look, very briefly, at what it is we're going to discuss. This is the ossuary. I would have liked to have gotten it here tonight. The people of Israel have never had an opportunity to see this. The owner who is here tonight, Odin Galan, is willing. I talked to the police last night about the possibility, and only scholars can see it. So, in Israel, in Jerusalem, which almost certainly is where this bone box originally came from, you can't see it now. This is the inscription, Yaakov Bar Yosef, Achui. It's a little difficult to read the Achui de Yeshua. Yeshua is pretty easy. Achui is a little rough. And here is Adi Yordani's drawing. She's one of the very few people, when she opines on it, she really has seen it in detail and in depth. And this is Odin Galan, who is one of the very largest collectors in Israel. He's a former officer in the IDF, and he makes his treasures available to scholars, and that's what may have got him into trouble. And here you can see some of his other ossuaries. He has about 30 ossuaries, including this one. Let me be clear at the outset of what my position is. I don't know for sure whether this inscription is a forgery or not. And I don't know for sure whether Oded Galan, who is sitting back there, is a forger or not. What I do know for sure is that the matter is being handled by the Israel Antiquities Authority, IAA, very badly. And what I do know for sure is that the evidence that they have produced does not prove that this inscription is a forgery. And I want to know the truth. And I think we have to seek it. if we are scholars and informed lay people, we cannot be satisfied with someone's just telling us without a good explanation, and that we don't have. Shlomo Mosaiv just said, for him, Professor Lemaire, judgment that it is authentic is enough. Here in Israel, I don't think that you understand how important this is worldwide. We held a press conference on October 21, 2002, and introduced our story by Professor André Lemaire of the Sorbonne. On the next day, October 22nd, 2002, this was on the front page of every newspaper in the world, the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc. It was a cover story in Christianity Today, one of the most important Christian publications in the United States. It was a major article in the New Yorker. It was the subject, a lead story in our Sunday Visitor. It was the subject of a discovery documentary made incidentally by Simcha Yakubovich, who's working here tonight. That was seen by something like 70 million people last Easter. Tonight, it's being filmed for 60 minutes. So what I'm saying is that there is an enormous interest in this all over the world. And the eyes of the world, especially the Christian world, are on Israel and the Israel Antiquities Authority and the way they are handling this. And they are doing an embarrassingly poor job. It is their position that this inscription is a modern forgery. That is the unanimous opinion of its experts. And that's enough for most people in Israel. The IAA said it's a forgery, and that's the end of it. Or it smells. Or Odin Galan is sleazy. I want to review the evidence with you tonight. This is a very intelligent, informed audience. And you are willing to take a careful look at the evidence and not accept it just because of the ex cathedra voice of the Israel Antiquities Authority. As if this were a court decision, and that's the end of it. That shouldn't be the end of it. Scholars should debate the issue. As I said, I don't know if it's a forgery or not, and I want to know. There are three kinds of evidence that we're going to review tonight. The first kind is what I call the humanistic sciences. Paleography, linguistics, for example. The second type is what we might call laboratory sciences, chemistry, geology, petrology, that kind of thing. And the last kind is what I call external evidence. On the first two kinds, the paleography and geology for short, almost none of us is an expert. So we have to look at what the experts say. On the external circumstances, though, we all can reason, and we can ask ourselves, what makes sense and what doesn't. So I want to go first to the paleography. The article that we published in Bar was written by Professor André Lemaire of the Sorbonne. Shlomo says that should be enough, and usually it is. He has studied it thoroughly. He's one of the world's leading paleographers. And he says there's no reason to doubt it. It's a good inscription. It was drawn by Ada Yardeni, who's here tonight, and I haven't greeted Ada, so I want to say hi now. But Ada also looked at it very carefully. And I think she is the second most prominent paleographer in Israel. And she also found it authentic. And the interesting part of both of these people is that they maintain this position despite what has happened at the IAA. They've looked carefully at what the IAA has said, and they disagree. I said that Ada was the second most prominent paleographer in Israel. Remind me to come back to the first most prominent paleographer in Israel. Many of you know already who that is. But there we have Andre Lemaire of the Sormelin, Ada Yardeni, whose classic work on Hebrew scripts and the Bar Kokhba caves is unsurpassed. Both saying, despite everything the IAA has said, that this is authentic. Frank Cross, recently retired from Harvard and America's leading paleographer, has said that if this is a forgery, the forger is a genius. Now, I hasten to add that Cross thinks it is a forgery, not for paleographic reasons, but because on the other side of that box from what you saw are some very faint rosettes, badly weathered. And Cross says that because they are weathered on one side, but the inscription side is not weathered, that the inscription must be a forgery. Now, Frank Cross is not an expert in the differential weathering of ossuaries. And as a matter of fact, they often weather very differently, sometimes even the same side, and no one else has picked up that argument. But the point I want to make is that paleographically, Cross says this is good. Now, more important, not a single experienced paleographer who has published an inscription of this period has written an explanatory article saying that there are paleographical problems with this inscription. And that says a lot. You can look at this inscription, as many people have done, and say, it doesn't look right to me. That's okay for starters, as my friend Kyle McCarter, who's a great paleographer at Johns Hopkins, told me. That's okay for starters, but then you've got to say why. Paleography is an interesting science. Letters develop over time, just like car grills. And an aleph in 200 BCE is not the same as an aleph in 50 CE. You can't have a 200 BC Dalet and a 50 CE Tzadi. And to make it more complicated, there's formal, there's cursive scripts, there's semi-formal, semi-cursive. It really takes a great deal of expertise to judge the date, and all the letters have to cohere. And because the aleph in Moab is slightly different from the aleph in Edom and in Judah. So it's really quite a science. And you've got to talk very specifically if you want to. I mean, this is done all the time. They say that this is something's wrong with here because this is a mixing of types or dates or places. This brings me to the IAA report. What does the IAA report say about the paleography of this inscription? What the IAA did, they were considering two different inscriptions, the Hoash inscription and the Ossuary inscription. So they appointed one committee for what they call the materials committee to look into the geology. And then they said we need a humanistic or linguistic, etc. committee for the inscriptions to look at the letters. And because one, the Hoash supposedly was a first temple inscription, and the Ossuary inscription was a second temple inscription, they divided that committee in two. The subcommittee for Yehoash, with experts there in that period, and another subcommittee of experts in the Second Temple period for the Ossuary inscription. Now the funny thing is that there was no paleographer on the subcommittee for the Ossuary inscription. That's unbelievable. They describe the two subcommittees. The Yehoash one includes archaeologists, I'm quoting, archaeologists, linguists, historians, paleographers, and epigraphers, experts in writing. End of quote. On the Ossuary, it includes archaeologists and Second Temple linguistic scholars. No paleographer, no epigrapher. Very telling contrast. And I'm trying to deal right now with the paleography. I'm limiting myself to the paleography of this inscription. Now, I mentioned earlier that Adi Ardeni is the second most prominent paleographer in Israel. The first one everybody agrees on, and at least 3/4 of this audience know who he is, Yossi Nevet. And Yossi is very skeptical. A question from Yossi casts a shadow over any inscription, and he's very pessimistic. And the committee report that appointed the committee said that Yossi Nevet, and they said he's of international repute, which is surely true, is not a member of the committee, but he is available for consultation to the committee. And he has expressed himself in no uncertain terms about the Yehoash inscription. And he has told you why in detail and concluded that it is very little question but that it is a forgery. What has he said publicly about the Ossuary inscription? Nothing. Sometimes silence speaks very loud. So I come back, as far as my conclusion on paleography is concerned, there is no reason to question this inscription paleographically. Let's turn now to geology, because geology is really the reason for the decision. If you read the report, such as it is, and I'll perhaps get time to talk about whether this is even a report, it's a statement by the individual members, and many of them just express themselves on their own limited area and really has nothing to do with the decision, but yet they all subscribe to the, supposedly, they haven't signed a single, one single document. Each has a little letter of its own, or her own. But Ronnie Reich is especially interesting because he feels that these are authentic. The Ossuary inscription is authentic. He says as much. My colleagues, he says, haven't been able to convince me that this is a forgery. But he says, I am forced to change my mind, or change my opinion, because of the geology. Now the geology is difficult, and I'm going to ask you to bear with me into the geology. I believe it is deeply flawed. But what we're talking about now is not that Hershel Shanks says one thing and another. Let's try to reason. Let's try to understand. It's not that difficult, but we need to get to the details. There are 3 isotopes of oxygen, 16, 17, and 18. There's so few 17s that we can forget about them. There's 16s and 18s. And from the ratio of these 2 isotopes, geologists can tell you what the liquid temperature that went into the making of this. And that's what is central to the IAA geological finding. It was done primarily by Yuval Gorin and with an isotopic assist from Avner Ayalon at the Geological Survey of Israel. When they examined the ossuary, they found that there was something that they call an inscription coating over the inscription. And they decided they would examine the isotope ratio in this inscription coating. And they determined that based on the ratio, the liquid that went into this was about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 degrees centigrade. That is hotter than water is found naturally in the Judean hills. So they concluded, this inscription coating must be a modern paste that was somehow attached there. Now, most people, or many people, let's say, simply concluded that therefore this is a forgery, because over you have this modern inscription coating. Don't jump to that conclusion. The inscription coating is modern, but that doesn't say that it's a forgery. The inscription coating may be there to hide a forgery, or it may be the result of cleaning. Now you say, Hershel, how do you know whether it could be the result of cleaning or not? I don't. I only know what the IAA has told me. And the word "or" is in that report of Avner Ayalon and of Yuval Gorin. They say it is a modern coating and it got there either to cover up a forgery, or the "or" is a quote from them. And then they don't go on to consider whether it could have been produced by cleaning, the second alternative. Now the fact is that all previous investigators have said that it was cleaned. And they've noted that it was cleaned, and we know that dealers normally will clean an inscription which is not so obvious because it shows better. Moreover, Odin, if he's to be believed, says that his mother cleaned it when it was on their mirpaset many years ago. And even a girlfriend whom he broke up with now says that she saw it with the inscription many years ago, and the reason she remembers is because her name included the name Joseph, and this inscription is the son of Joseph. So the question remains, could this inscription coating be the result of cleaning? And this is never explored by the IAA team. Completely ignored. And the head of the GSI, the Geological Survey of Israel, says himself, we did not find that this is a forgery. All we found was that this was the isotopic ratio in the inscription coating. If there's one obligation of the IAA at this point, it is to look under every stone to see if there's proof one way or the other. Don't they have an obligation to use their common sense to say, well, let's examine whether this could be a result of cleaning? They haven't. Now I think I'll say something. This is the first time this has ever been said publicly. We don't have a team, we're not the IAA, but we have a little seichel. So I said, look, Suzanne Singer is here tonight. She's been helping me for 28 years or so. I said, go out and buy some Israeli cleansers. So she bought 4 cleansers. And she said, how am I going to get these to the United States? If I bring these in, they'll think I'm bringing anthrax. So try it. So she brought them in, and I don't want to make too big a thing out of this yet, but we had them analyzed, and they go a long way toward explaining these unusual isotopic ratios because they contain the same kind of chemicals. The IAA isn't even trying. Give it a fair shake. The next question, of course, is how was this inscription coating made? That the IAA, Yuval Gorin, tells us. He says what this forger did was scrape some limestone off and mix it with the hot water and smear the paste over it. There's only one trouble with this. That would not produce the isotopes that they found because limestone won't dissolve in hot water. They now admit this. They say, okay, all right, you're right. What the forger did to make this inscription coating was scrape off some limestone from the box, make a paste with some water, it doesn't have to be hot water, smear it on, and then put the whole thing in the oven. Sounds good. One problem. Won't produce the isotopes that they got. They admit this now. It's all right, okay, wait a minute. We can do it. Don't use hot water, use hot acid. Well, the problem there is acid will leave a trace. There's no trace. So they say, okay, wait a minute. That's true of all acids, but carbonic acid. Carbonic acid won't leave a trace, and they're right. But carbonic acid is not available commercially. You can't go out and buy it. You got to make it. And it's not easy. You got to know this. So the assumption is that this forger was so sophisticated, he knew to make this kind of paste with carbonic acid. And yet, he was the dumbest guy in the world. Do you know what he did? He made this paste a different color from the patina on the rest of the ossuary. This patina, this inscription coating, is grayish. The patina on the ossuary is brown ochre. And do you know how I know that there's a difference in the color? I'm not so good at judging colors, I admit. I only know because the IAA told me they're a different color. It's their description. So the guy has to be so dumb, and there's something else. You can take this inscription coating off with a toothpick. Real patina takes a scalpel, a metal scalpel. So this has got to be the dumbest thing in the world to try to hide a forgery with this inscription coating. But if they are to be believed, that's what happened. Now, on the other hand, they have ignored some obvious tests. Let's suppose I'm a forger. And Batya comes to me and she says, Hershel, I want to make a forgery. I said, Batya, you've come to the right place. I'm a forger. What do you want forged, Batya?
We don't do things like that.
No, everybody's suspicious here. She says, Hershel, she says, I've got an ossuary here I picked up for a few $100s. I want you to carve an inscription in it. And I've got a scholar that has made the inscription. The letters are right. Don't worry about it. Your job, Hershel, is to engrave this inscription on the ossuary. And I would say to Batya, you know, if you want me to do it, I'll do it. But Batya, this is dumb. First of all, when I begin to engrave that, I'm going to cut the patina that's in this, it's all over this box. And it's going to have sharp edges. And at this point, Batya interrupts me. Now, wait a minute, Hershel. The sharp edges we can deal with because Yuval Gorin has told us how a forger acts, and he sandblasts it so that the edges aren't so sharp. I go, okay, Batya. But, you know, even a metal tool, even a steel tool will leave some metallic fragments in the letters of the engraving. And worst of all, Batya, the real patina is going to run right up to where I engraved the forgery. Batya, let me make you a seal which has no patina. Why do you want this Meshuggah ossuary? Okay. End of that dialogue. Now, the reason I say that is because that's what you look for if there is a question about authenticating an inscription in limestone. So even if there was no inscription coating, this is what you would look for. And they haven't done it. Why haven't they done it? These guys are isotope specialists. Isotopes are going to tell you the answer, and they don't do the obvious other tests that need to be done. Before I published this article by Under the Mayor, I knew that it was explosive. And I thought I better go to every length to make sure that I'm okay. And I consulted paleographers, linguists, most distinguished Aramaicists in the United States. And on the scientific end, I said, I want this thing studied. So someone said, why don't you call the Geological Survey of Israel? That sounded like good advice to me. So I got on the phone with Amos Vine, the director, and I told him my problem, and I said, would you look into this? He agreed. And he appointed 2 of his specialists to study it. And they said it was okay and gave me an appropriate letter on the letterhead of the Geological Survey of Israel. They're here tonight. Shimon Alani and Amnon Rosenfeld. The interesting thing is not that they opined before the IAA study. The important thing is that they have studied everything that's happened, including the most recent articles by Professor Gorin. And Ilani and Roosevelt of the GSI continue to maintain the same position, that geologically there's no reason to doubt the authenticity of this inscription. And the committee itself, incidentally, found underneath the inscription coating some good patina. And therefore, in these statements, they say the last part may be good, authentic, and not a forgery. And someone else says the first part may be authentic. So even you don't have a unanimity of opinion at all in the IAA report. But the important point is that the GSI people continue to maintain, knowing everything, that they've studied it carefully, that geologically it's okay. We had arranged for an exhibit of the ossuary at the Royal Ontario Museum. It arrived sadly broken. But sometimes good things happen from bad. Because it was broken, there was an opportunity to see it in the inscription and profile. And the Royal Ontario Museum did a study of it. And they found there was no geological scientific reason to question the authenticity of this. Again, it's not really so important that they came to this decision before the IAA decision, but that after the IAA came out with its decision, they continue, despite what the IAA has said, to hold that there's no reason to doubt the authenticity of this inscription. Finally, we get to what I call external circumstances. And that is a lot of reasoning. And it gets into rumors and characters. Let me give you just a little bit. Odin Galan says that he's owned this for 2 decades or more. He's been collecting for something like 40 years. He bought this as a young man, kept it on his parents' Barefaced, and then moved it to where he moved in with his girlfriend, and finally to his own apartment. If he is telling the truth, I think that this has to be authentic. I'll tell you why I say that. Now, we're just reasoning now. You can disagree with me, and this is my reasoning, and I respect you if you disagree. Forgers forge to make money. Okay, sometimes somebody says, oh, well, no, you could forge something to get even with your professor who you don't like anymore, who did you in. Or you could forge to make a joke. Okay. But whatever the reason, the one thing that cannot happen is that you forge it and then it goes for 25 years and no one knows it, and no one says anything. That's why I say that if he is telling the truth, that he's owned it for 2 decades and more, it's got to be authentic. And the question is Odin Galan a barefaced liar? Now, I suppose that the IAA should try to determine that. There are ways. But so far as I've known, all they've done is harassed him. Something else makes me suspicious. There are terrible, terrible rumors going on. The craziest rumors. One of them is that Shlomo Messiah, who just had his 81st birthday, I think, is the forger. I mean, it's laughable. But let me tell you the worst in my judgment. 2 Jerusalem scholars told me a story. They said, we saw this ossuary in the mid-90s, but without the reference to Jesus. Wow. If that is true, this has got to be a forgery. No question about it. But, you know, I'm not too reliable. Maybe I misunderstood them. Maybe, I don't know what. Maybe I'm lying. I don't have a reputation for veracity myself. It's not a big thing. But I wrote it up. One of them said, please don't use my name, because he drew a finger across his neck. He'll be murdered. Okay, so I didn't use his name. Before my publication came out, it turned out that they told the same story, word for word, to a very prominent American scholar by the name of Eric Myers from Duke University. Eric published it and used neither of their names. I used Joe Zeiss's name, who was one of them. I didn't use the other guy. We printed a picture of him with pixelated face so you couldn't see who he is. Very recently, Eric Myers gave a lecture at Cornerstone University in Michigan, and he outed the other guy, so I'll tell you who it is. He's outed. It's Emil Puesh at Kol Biblik. And Emil Puesh is a very distinguished paleographer. You know, you and I can see this inscription, and 10 minutes later, we have no idea what we've said, what we've seen. But this guy really knows paleography. And there's another thing about Emil. He's a Catholic priest. And he believes that Mary was a perpetual virgin. So he believes that Jesus did not have a blood brother. And therefore, he believes that this Jesus is not the New Testament Jesus. This is not Jesus of Nazareth. Not a bad argument. Scholar, he makes it. He made this argument very widely in 3 or 4 different publications, giving every reason why this could not be Jesus of Nazareth. This is brother could be a half-brother, or it could be a cousin, or it could be a friend, or there's other reasons why this does not refer to Jesus of Nazareth. But the one thing he doesn't say is that, hey, I saw this ossuary in the mid-90s without the reference to Jesus. This is inexplicable. Why didn't he say that? As a matter of fact, what he did say is that this is one hand. That is to say, the first part and the last part were written by the same person. Well, if the part about Jesus was added, how could it be one hand? Is he lying? Well, the aggressive Israeli press that's willing to bring down a politician at the snap of a finger didn't ask him, so far as I know. Nobody's asked Emil Puesh, hey, well, how could this be? So it's that kind of rumor that's going on that really makes me wonder. I think there is a forgery frenzy going on. The ivory pomegranate, inscribed ivory pomegranate, which may have come from Solomon's temple, has now been declared to be a forgery. James Snyder at the Israel Museum, they bought it for $550,000. I called James and I said, what about this? What's the evidence? He said, I have no idea. They've never come to me. We're willing to examine it if they come to me with some evidence. People are claiming that many things, many important inscriptions are fakes. Eric Myers, the same Eric Myers, said that 1/3, or to be exact, 30 to 40% of the inscriptions, the ancient inscriptions in the Israel Museum, 30 to 40% are forgeries. Yet we really don't have any analysis. All we have is these rumors. Now to conclude, that's where matters now stand with the Ossuary inscription. Whether it is a forgery or not, I don't know. But the IA has certainly not proven its case. Earlier, I said that it was doing an embarrassingly poor job. But it's also doing an unnecessarily poor job. And I'll tell you why I say that. There's a very simple solution, and I don't understand how anybody can quarrel with this. Why don't we let an international team of experts examine it and do whatever they need to do, short of destroying it? And it only involves saying that we didn't do a very good job the first time. But I think that anyone that studies this has to realize that they've done not a very good job. So the solution is easy if they would just do it. Let an international team of experts from, for example, Asmosia. Asmosia is the Association for the Study of Marble and Other Stones in Antiquity. That would be an ideal, or the Louvre, or any of a number of highly respected venues asked to look at this thing and give us a report that holds water and the reasons for their judgment, and that would easily solve the matter. Thank you very much, and I'll be glad to take questions.